Good afternoon, everyone. This is the WPF presentation with Dyalog. Michael and I are going to be showing you that today. So it's a little bit tough to stay on top of things in the GUI world, and WPF seems to be very elegant, very nice product that we think is worth looking into. And it's easy to use from APL2. WPF is not a new layer on top of things. It's not a new wrapper. It's a rewrite. It's a different thing. It uses direct text as the technology underneath. And the way I look at it, I see the relation between direct text and WPF a little bit the same as a low-level language in APL. APL makes calls to low-level routines, and WPF is doing the same thing. So, for example, direct text takes care of all the details as drawings, for example. And it is also a bit of a user fee for some services, and still does it. It is much more efficient because it understands the things like texture and gradients that can be rendered directly by the video card. So if you look at it, you've got the application, you've got all your layout data and everything. It goes through the framework, which goes to the Dyalog, direct text, eventually the driver, so that's basically the way it works. Now, the goal of WPF is to take as much of the work off onto the video card so that things like complex graphic routines are done by the GPU and not the CPU. We think it's a good choice. And one of the key things is that resolution independence. So that if you move from one machine that has a different resolution, the proportion stays the same. And it's not being clipped by the window or something like that. It's a fairly new technology, and there's already several versions that came out, 3.0, 3.5, 4.0 is the latest release. And each time it's minor refinements. They come out actually with every new .NET version. So the idea is that you want to separate design from the code. You want the design to be done on one part, the code on some other part. You don't want to start mixing both together. Well, this is the way it's been done so far. People have been trying to avoid doing that. So it's easier for everyone. So the designer can concentrate on design, and the coders can concentrate on code. WPF uses something called XAML, which is an XML language to describe the GUI. In the introduction of XAML, there's no more excuses to not do this. XAML stands for Extensible Application Markup Language. It's pronounced XAML. And it's a markup language used to create .NET objects. So XAML will, for example, define the arrangement of all your objects on your window, panels, the buttons, the controls. And XML-based formats such as XAML are pretty flexible. You can take them out. It's like text. So you can put it into Visual Studio. You can put it into some version control system. It's really easy to manipulate. And it was designed to be logical, readable, and straightforward, but it is not compact. That's one thing. And everything you can do in XAML can be done in your favorite .NET language, like APL. But the reverse is not entirely true. In XAML, the objects that you're looking for must be found somewhere. So there is the same concept as in APL, namespaces. So very often you're going to see these two HTTP blah, 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 blah. This is the location of a namespace. So if you see this, it means you're going to be looking for some objects in that namespace. And that corresponds to this namespace here. There's another namespace that is used quite often. This is this one here, corresponds to this one here. Always in XAML, you will see right at the beginning the equivalent of quad using, if you want, that says I'm going to be using this namespace, and it will come into this form. We'll see it in a moment. XAML has what we call attribute and properties, and this is the way those are described. So you'll see the text version. Here's a button whose content is okay, but the background is white, and those are called attributes. A property would be seen in this way. You have the button, and instead of having an attribute, it would be described as a property. So you have button content, it is okay, button content, and so on and so on. So you'll see these two formats in the example. Now, one of the things that WPF is trying to not to do is to specify the size and the position of your objects. It tries to make it more like a browser where you put objects and they align themselves and resize themselves according to whatever is needed. So trying to use hard-coded sizes is limiting. It forces you to put things at a specific place, and if the screen doesn't match your expectation, then you're going to end up with some unexpected results, sometimes like clipping. And if you use, for example, a new font because you changed locale or something like that, then the buttons are not going to be resized properly, and you're going to end up with some cutting of the text and or the object itself. So instead, the emphasis is creating more flexible layouts that adapt themselves, like I mentioned about the HTML browsers. So it resizes itself properly. One of the things you will see in XAML very often is that you will say something like string. So it has to find out what is a string in XAML. So there is this a type converter that in APL you would have to specify the type of object that you're going to be using, but in XAML this is done automatically. One of the very important objects in WPF are panels. Panels are containers. They contain several elements. A window, for example, can only contain one thing, but that thing can be a panel, and the panel can contain different things. There's many kinds of panels, each with their own layout logic, and they're used quite extensively. They are effectively parents that support the arrangement of multiple objects, their children. They all derive from that system Windows UI element. Well, the first panel we're going to see is the stack panel, which places its elements in a horizontal or vertical stack, which means one after the other, either from left to right or from top to bottom. But this layout is typically used for small sections of larger, complex windows. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to APL, I'm going to give you a small demo. So here, this is entirely written in APL. There's no XAML involved here. And here, what we do is typically to get at the objects. Remember what I was telling you about the namespaces before? Well, we have to do something equivalent here. And these are the two namespaces that we're going to be needing. And we create a window. And then we're going to set its top left width and height. So now it should be. So you see now it's changed size. And then we create a stack panel, which will be the content of our window. And then just to show you this, I'm going to set it to the left. And now I'm going to create a series of buttons. I could create any elements. So I'm going to create buttons because they're easy to see. Create 10 of them. And I'm going to add them as the children of the content of this window. So we see them all here. But I haven't specified anything about these buttons, so you can see they're very thin. They take the entire width, and you have very little height at the moment. So by setting the content of these buttons with some text, which is going to be the label effectively, then they're all going to be automatically resized in height. The B1 to B10 must be shown, so WPF automatically changes the size of the buttons. I'm going to pick some colors, and I need this particular namespace for that, and change all their colors automatically. Set their width and height. And just to show you that we can make something different, I'm going to enlarge some of them, give them a minimum width. So B6 to B10 have been increased in width. If I want to align the second one, I tell it to go to the right. If I want to put the entire panel, I can put the entire panel to the right. As you can see, the panel, which is red, only uses the portion that it needs. I can put the entire thing to the left, but see, B2 remains within the stack panel itself. It's not to the right of the window, it's to the right of the panel. And then I can make it stretch just like at the beginning again. I can put it at the bottom, at the top. I can change the orientation to horizontal. So now all the buttons are from left to right. and I can make them in the middle of the window rather than stretch the entire window. Now, let's go back to my presentation. So this was a stack panel. A dock panel is somewhat like a stack panel, except that you can specify on which side of the window you want it to be. So going back here, I'm going to remove all the buttons there. Create a dock panel, put it in blue so we can see it. Add the children. As you can see, they've been added to the left, just like the stack panel. So far, it doesn't seem to me any difference. But I can take the 8th one and move it to the top. Now see what happens? The 9th moved back to the left, but the remaining section, 8th one on top, the remaining section is here. So this being in the middle, it is now offset a little bit. And I can do the same with the 3 at the bottom, and all the other one readjust themselves automatically. Now, we can't see very well with this example, so I'm going to create another one. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a dock panel just like this one, in which I will put a button, and I will set some color so it will be easier to see. I've got 10 just like before. They're all supposed to be aligned to the left, but I'm going to change so that the 3rd and the 7th go to the top, the 4th and the 5th go to the bottom, the 2nd and the 10th go to the right, and now I'm going to put them one after the other. So the first one goes to the left, second one goes to the right, because it had been set to go to the right. Third one goes to the top, the 4th one goes to the bottom, 5th one also to the bottom, the 6th one, I didn't say where it goes, so it's going to go to the left, 7th to the top, 8th one goes to the left again, because we hadn't specified anything. And then now if I want, I can remove the 5th one, but look at this. The 5th here is at the bottom, and it's in the middle of this layer here. Once I remove it, the other ones are going to readjust themselves automatically. This one's going to come down, this one's going to come down, and use the entire space there. Now, if I reinsert W5, it's going to go to the bottom, because we said it was going to go to the bottom, but this time it's going to use that space here. So it won't reuse the space it had before. I'm telling it now, go over here, so it won't be at the same location. It's in the middle, at the bottom, but not in the place where it was before. And finally, I put the last 2 ones to the left and to the right. And if you want, you can make the last one occupy the entire space. In this case, I said I wanted not to do that. So it's not in the middle. This is the position where I told it to go. Okay, so this was a dock panel. A rapid panel is going to place the elements in a series of wrapped lines. So it's going to start with the left one, and then it's going to go left to right. As soon as it needs more space, if it can't put it on the first line, it will go on the second line. And keep doing this, it's going to wrap the layout. It renders pretty much like an HTML page. There's 2 ways. You can go from left to right or from top to bottom. So again, if I just remove these guys and create a wrap panel, add all the children, and if you look, they've all been added from left to right, but as I resize the form, they readjust automatically. I don't have to, there's no code behind it, there's nothing, there's no callbacks. It's all WPF doing the entire work for me. I haven't done anything. And if you look, you can see that the panel itself occupies only the section it needs to occupy. I can change the orientation to vertical. And again, it's going to be exactly the same thing. It will readjust itself according to how I use the form. What I've shown to you so far is all written in API. I've used .NET, I've specified what using, I told it where to go to get the objects. If I wanted, I could have used XAML for that. And one of the things I can do now is ask .NET WPF to save the form that we have here in XAML. So what's going to happen is that if we look at the XAML now, this is what the form looks like. Remember what I was telling you here about this thing? This is the namespace I was telling you about before. So to recreate this form, the one I have in APL, all I have to do is run this code here. So it has the window, the top left that I specified, the state, the width, the height that I had specified is visible. And all the objects are going to be found into this namespace here. And the first thing the window contains is a wrap panel, a vertical orientation, here's the background color, it's centered. And here's the first button within it, second, third, and so on, and so on, and so on. So this is how you would recreate this form. And in fact, I'm going to recreate it now. I'm going to ask it to, using the same XAML that I have there, recreate a new one. Now, because it's been recreated now, it's visible and everything, but because I haven't moved my other window, they're one on top of the other, and you can see it by doing this. So now I have two windows. One is the one that was I created originally, and the other one was recreated by using XAML, and both of them are independent. So you saw I could do it with APL, and I can also do it with XAML. Same effect in this case here. There's no callback, so it's, I close them. Here's another example of a window that contains some objects, text boxes, buttons. That's one that Michael created actually. And I show it, and it's got 3 buttons, some text boxes, and I can resize, and this is all done automatically. Okay, so that was the wrap panel. There's also a grid. A grid is just like you would expect an object with rows and columns, just like the APL grid. It is one of the most flexible objects used in the WPF, and it's commonly used also. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a grid that, again, Michael created. So here's the row, make it visible. We're going to create a new grid in it, show the three lines, and 3 rows, 4 columns, put a title. Get the row definitions, change the height of the second. Now, notice that GR is an APL array, so the index that is used is the APL index, my quad IO being 1. This is the second row that we're going to change. In some cases, if you're using the .NET objects, then the index that you use is the .NET index, so quad IO 0 usually. So for example, here, I'm using the row definition is number 1 and 2, but this is a .NET object. It's not my APL object. So this potential will apply here. So it means the second and the third height will be changed. And what this means here, it's a XAML, it's a WPF notation that says this will take twice as much space as one that would have any specification, and this one will take 3 times as much. So if you look at this, the 3 columns are being allocated 1 space, twice the space, 3 times the space, effectively divided into 6. 1 6, 2 6, 3 6. So let's start afresh. Let's do this again. And we're going to add a status bar. The status bar here is contained in this definition here. And ST now contains a status bar, as you can see, which contains 4 objects. And if you look in the definition of the XAML, I have some objects that have names. And for example, I have a text block here, which is, whose name is text1. I have another one here, which is a progress bar, whose name is PB. And I want text2, text3. So I have 4 objects here that have names. So I can go into APL and ask to find those names, and if you look, text1 is the text box we have, text box we have, text2 is another one, and so on. I can actually display all of them. And if you look in the session, you will see that the 4 objects, I have now 4 objects I can play with in APL. The function find name applied to this particular object got me 4 objects, all the ones that had the names that I asked for. Text 1, 2, 3, and PB, and I got 4 objects back. So now I could do anything I want with these objects. I could change their content, I could change whatever I want. Now we're going to create some other elements here. Text button, expanded text button, 2 combo blocks, set their minimum height and width, and we're going to add them to the grid. So now, what I'm going to do is change the set their rows and columns of each one of them, so you can see the objects taking place there. So I have an expander here, it's got nothing. I've got some drop-down combo boxes this is aligned to. So I'm going to fill them in now. I'm going to set the text of the first one as an example. The button is going to have an OK name. I'm going to create a stack panel for the expander here. I'm going to add 5 labels to it. So now you can see the elements. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth. I'm going to change the minimum height and the minimum width. To CB1, I will add first, second, and third. And set the index to 0. So the first one will be now appearing. And the second one, first, second, third, and fourth, and so on and so on. So I'm just filling in the grid with all kinds of items. And for one of the things here, for example, I have text I will put in there. And if I can even put in some spell checking. For example, you can see that there's some names, some nouns in there, words that are not great. So if I say spell check is enabled, then you can see now that I can right-click on this. I have just like in Word or those that support spell checking, I can change those for toast, for example, or whatever. So it's all there. I haven't done anything yet. All I've done is I've set it up. It's all behind, it's all usable, it's all available. Scroll viewer, I could remove things, and so on and so on. So you can change the look, you can, I've got a progress bar, that was my status bar that I had before, and so on and so on. So you can see that you can create everything you could do you can do with Quad WC, you can do here and more, or better. And it's very flexible. It's easy to use.
So freeze panes. Can you do the equivalent of freeze panes?
Freeze pane.
Freeze panes. So in Excel, you can have 2 regions scrolling separately.
Yep. Yes, you can do that.
And you can also have 2 independent panels scrolling together. So you could actually have, say, 3 columns where you decided the first and the third columns. You wish that if you move the first one, the third one will move with it. So you can, not only can you do what you want to do, but you can also do more sophisticated things as well.
You list the properties of one of those columns.
Yeah.
So you list the properties of one of those columns, it goes
Yes.
on for several pages.
Put an L minus 2.
Oh, yeah. No, you don't want to do that.
I think you ought to. I think you ought to.
And how about, do they have built-in so that you can copy and paste to Excel and it'll all work great?
But I've got a demonstration how it works with Access. It will come at the end.
Yeah, this is just the basic stuff. I don't know anything. I'm just showing you how the low-level stuff works. The fireworks come at the end. It's just like,
I have an example where Access works directly with a data with an object.
finally, another panel that is that can be used, especially if you want to do graphics, is the canvas. And this is pretty much like what we have now, where you position things at fixed coordinates. It's got some use, but not if you want to resize things and stuff like that. So there's many features not found in QuadWC as you have found.
Before you do, there's one thing I should say. Sorry to cut.
Yep.
You saw many panels being shown there. As you go up in a more sophisticated manner, the grid is more expensive performance-wise than a stack panel, and so therefore you have to work out what you want to do with a particular panel, because a lot of applications do use a grid for everything, which you're quite tempted to do. But if you only have a simple requirement in a certain area, you should go down to the lowest form of panel you can get away with, because there is not much, but there is some performance impact as you go to a more sophisticated panel. So you should just be aware of that when you're using them.
Some of the things that are new are things like routed events. Then this is something that is quite interesting. It allows you to have an event originate in an element but handled by something else. For example, you could have a click handled by the form instead of being handled by the button on which you are on. This may be for whatever reason, maybe right click to create a menu, or F1 that's handled for general help, or something like that. So it will originate in one, but be handled by another. It rises up. The toolbar, we're going to rise up the toolbar, for example, and then handled by the, before it's handled by you.
You can go either direction, actually. Oh,
Yes.
right.
There's direct events that are handled just like ordinary .NET events, and then you have bubbling events that they travel up the containment hierarchy. Like I said, for example, you may have a mouse down, it's raised by the element that's clicked, then it's raised by another one, then another one, and then until it reaches the top. And it can be handled at all levels. It could be handled by the button, it could be handled by the form, it could be handled all the way. And then you have the opposite, which is tunneling event. They go down the other way. So that gives you, for example, a chance to have a look at the preview what the event is and decide whether or not you can stop it in its track. Dependency properties.
.NET properties, standard properties in .NET, are fixed. So you set them and you don't know you've set them, they just have action. A dependency property is something that is calculated from various aspects around it. So it isn't that the property itself has been set to a value. For example, you saw how the panel was resizing itself, or the buttons within the panel were resizing themselves, and you don't normally specify a width to things. And a width can be determined by the width of the surrounding panel. It can be controlled by the fact you've set the width physically. It can be controlled by the width of something else. And so therefore there are many things, there are actually 10 things that contribute to the value of a dependency property. Its surrounding environment, various other bits and pieces. And so therefore it isn't just from the value you set to it. So that's why it's a dependency property. It depends on other things around it. And there is a strict hierarchy of how these things are decided. It's one of the reasons why you don't set the width, unless you have to, the width of a property, because you override the other 9 possibilities of determining the value. Because if you actually physically set the property, you're overriding the calculation, if you like, of what the width of that property should be. So it's probably best illustrated, but it is that it gets its value from the environment if you don't set it.
Here's a simple example. I have a window. I'm going to put in a slider. You can see here the slider is just like it's simple. There's no decorators, and I'm setting some of its properties. Then I add a new text box. Put some text in it. Set its thickness, and now I'm going to bind the element so that the size of the text depends on the value of the slider. So now, when I do this, as you can see, things change. So the font of the text is bound to the value of the slider. This is just a very simple example here, but it gives you an idea what we mean by that. And as you can see, there's no callback function here. There's nothing. All I'm saying is that the value of the font is the property which is bound to the value of the slider.
Yeah. What actually happens is the binding object you create on line 17, you create an object called binding, called BD, and that sets up the plumbing, if you like. And the dependency property, one of the properties of a dependency property, is that whenever it changes, it triggers an event and says, oh, I'm changing. And the binding object has set up this plumbing to listen to that event. And then when it hears or notices that that event has changed, automatically you've said that I want you to change the font property. So that BD object you've created, the binding object, is, if you like, a link between the two sides, between the slider, the tick value of the slider, and the font size. And the slider generates an event saying I've changed, or the tick value says I've changed. The binding object notices that, and then it changes the font size of the other object. So it's an internal plumbing that WPF gives you automatically. And you don't have to worry about any of that once you set the binding up.
Here's another example using XAML this time. This is a XAML that does basically what I was doing in APL, except that I've got two things that are bound together. So for example, I can move this, and you can see that the number is changing as well as the text. But I could go over here and change this, and you can see everything is changed automatically. So it's all, those three things, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
As soon as you change one, the other is changed. But this is just a simple example.
I've actually got an example at the end where you can actually change an APL variable, and it will do that as well now.
So that was the binding. Styles. Styles is something that you use, it's pretty much like a CSS in HTML. You set a style and then you can reuse it in some objects or forms or whatever. You say, I've got a style, for example, I have a style, a button style, depending on if the mouse is over, it changes the foreground to blue. So you could have many things, and then you can say, my button here is using that style, and so on and so on. In fact, I think I also have an example somewhere. Okay, so for example, I set a style. Let's see if I can, and if I put, see, when I move over the button here, I've said that this button has got that style there. And I think I have another button somewhere. This one. See, this one uses the same style. It's not a button, it's just text, but it uses the same style. And if you look at the example, I've set a style here which I call big font button, and it sets the value to 18, and it's got an animation so that it goes from 0 in 2 seconds, it grows up to 32, and so on and so on. This is all XAML. I mean, I've set the style here, and all I have to do is reuse it somewhere else.
The important thing is you can have a graphic designer who doesn't know anything about APL design this in Visual Studio or Expression Blend, and it's then directly usable straight away in APL. So sometimes you don't even need to understand any of this. If your company has got somebody who is a graphic designer, can do some very pretty things now, very dramatic, and they're also usable in APL the same way you do them in C# or whatever. That's the most important thing to note.
Yeah. Yeah, my examples are not everyday examples, they're just should give you a feeling for what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, I'm going to show you some of the things you can do. All the examples that I have in the workspace now, you've got the XAML and you've got the APL, and you can actually play with it. I've got a user command that will allow you to edit some of these, modify them if you want, test them. It's all on the
Let's go to the next stage of the workshop is to play with some of these.
Yeah, once I'm finished boring you with this, I will having a little hands-on experience. Data binding. This is about tying .NET objects together. So, for example, you can edit stuff that's bound to an Access database. It's all done almost like magic. Triggers. I think we've seen something before when you have a property that changes. Using a dependency property, you can change something else. So you have several types. You've got property, data, and event triggers. You can express with very complex logics with triggers. You can have several, and if they're all on or any of them, something can happen just like you would expect. You can have graphics, 2D, 3D, just to give you an idea. I have something here. Yeah, you can do graphics like this, and the XAML for this looks like that. This is a little bit more complicated.
3D is not as easy as it looks.
No, yeah. But I mean, it's feasible. I mean,
yes.
And the thing is that not only can you see that object here, it's static at the moment, but I mean, you could have a camera that moves around it, or you can animate the thing. It's the things you can do with this is quite incredible.
I mean, DirectX was originally used, it was now used for gaming, so the technology that they use in gaming is now what's being used here. So you can do quite a lot of sophisticated things that just wasn't possible with the normal Win32 stuff.
And then there's Silverlight, which is a slightly cut down version of WPF that should run in most browsers and include a small .NET framework called ManageCode, so it's safe to run it in any browser. And applications built in Silverlight, for example, when APL Sharp is available, will be able to run in the browser without any installation on the computer. So what I'm going to do now, there's a workspace in your memory stick that you can use. Here's another example of a form. So I have a duck panel, and what's going to happen is that I'm going to create your standard form where you're going to have a title, you're going to have a menu, you're going to have a status bar. So for this, I have a duck panel, and then I create a menu, and I add it. As you can see, the menu now is taking the entire panel. The reason is because I haven't told it how to extend itself. So I'm going to align it to the left and to the top. And I'm going to add 3 menu items. As soon as I do that, it's starting to get in shape. I'm going to set their width, and then I'm going to give their names, header, file. So at the moment, these are all empty. And they already have something to go quicker, like Alt F, and the letters are underscore. Then I'm going to put the 3 menu items, one cut, copy, and paste. And to these, I will assign a command. And this is a command in WPF, is something that I'll let Michael describe in more details later. But let's just say that there are things that can be done automatically. For example, if I add them here, you can see that edit now contains cut, copy, and paste. But as you can see, they're all inactive because there's nothing to cut, nothing to copy. I have nothing in my that I've copied so far, and nothing to paste. So, but if I had something I could copy from, these would automatically come up. Because I put a label, change the color to red, and add it. So now the title of my form is, of course, taking the entire thing, and dock it to the top, align it to the center. Now I create a status bar, and I add it, but it's taking, of course, the entire thing in, put a message in there, and change the color, put it at the bottom, and create a new stack panel. It's not at the bottom now because it thinks it needs the entire thing, but as soon as I'm going to add something else, it will move. 3 buttons, put it onto the stack panel, add to the stack panel. Now, see, the status bar went to the bottom because it's been squeezed in. So the rest of this orange section is my form, if you want. And I'm going to have 3 buttons in it. OK, cancel the help, set the thickness, add them. So you have now 3 buttons. And then I can put them at the bottom. Set their thickness. They're a little bit too much to see, the letters are a little bit too much to the side of the button, so I'm going to increase that there. Then I create a wrap panel, set its background to light gray, add it up, light green, add it up, and then all it's going to contain is a label that says items over here. But this is to give you an example of how to build a form. You've got your menu on top, the title, the status bar, the buttons, and then eventually your form that would contain whatever thing that you need in it. And this whole thing resizes naturally. Everything is done.
Do you have an example where what you put on is relative to something else? So, in other words, everything you put on there, you just said go to the top, or go to the bottom, or go to the side. What if I want, I want my next piece to go beside a piece that I've already put on?
Okay, yeah, I'll have an example. Show you that this form here, if I want it, I could have it as a XAML. This is the XAML produced. This is a little bit too hard to see, so I'm going to run it twice through XAML, quad XML, and now it's in better format. So this XAML here reproduces exactly all the APL code that you had here. So all the APL code I had here can be done with this XAML. So I create another one.
What's the current performance of running the function versus loading the XAML?
The XAML is still a bit slower, but it won't improve till we get partial classes, really.
So now, because I've recreated a new form based on the other one, I got 2, and they're both in the covenant. So I can close them in this example. So you wanted an example with, what was it again?
So if I want to create a form, okay, and I know I have 3 edit boxes, and then to the right of those edit boxes, I want to put, a tree view, for example. So I know when I'm building my form, I want to create edit box 1, and then I want to be able to say, put edit box 2 below edit box 1.
Yeah, you could have a stack panel, one on top of the other.
Okay.
That's one thing.
Okay. All right. So that would all work for stack panel. But then I want to put, a graph or picture to the right of,
The
one
spare.
of my edit boxes.
Yep. So you can have your two edit boxes in a wrap panel here, and then your other thing on the right. So you would have another wrap panel, that contains two things. The first element is the other wrap panel that contains two things. The second element would be your graphic. So they would be next to each other.
So you create that by saying,
In my wrap panel, I have another wrap panel.
I have another wrap panel.
So the concept of panels is very important here. It determines the layout. And in fact, I have
It's a bit like using nested arrays in form. You
Yeah.
can have many depths to your nested array to keep everything rectangular when you think. And then when you apply form to it, it puts all the necessary padding around the various boxes to get it all lined up. So if you had sort of, first of all, 4-element nested array, you could actually then make one of the cells, another nested array within inside that, another nested array inside that, and so on. So you can actually get quite a sophisticated layout of data if you're just doing APL matrices, using a nesting upon nesting upon nesting. And you would do the same thing with this. You can nest your panels. You don't just have one stack panel. You can have a stack panel within a stack panel. You can have a grid within a stack panel, and so on. So you can actually treat it very much like nesting arrays.
Okay.
And then basically what happens is when WF comes to render it, it's like applying a thorn. And thorn then basically recurses through all the different elements of your nested array and makes the boxing around the padding correct to make it all look correct. And that's what WPF does. So you achieve what you want by nesting your panels.
Let me show you an example
And
here.
there's nice border properties
Yes.
on all of the objects, so you can specify the spacing that you
Yes,
want.
margin and padding as well.
So like we would use groups, right? So you create a
Yeah.
form and then you have a group in the form, and so that,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
what you're saying is you use panels instead of
Yeah.
groups.
Yes, exactly. But also, I mean, you saw there was one example with the rep panel where things were coming down the next line. There's no reason, rather than using buttons as Dan had done, if you had just a simple label and an edit box, you wouldn't really want, when the panel closed in, the edit box to go down and leave the label on the first row. So what you do is you put a stack panel around each one. So your stack panels would then go with the wrap in the way the buttons did, which would mean the label and the text would always go together. So by doing that is how you do these sort of things. There are lots of games you play with the nesting of panels. It's like groups, but it's much more sophisticated.
Let me demonstrate that right away. Here we have a form, and we have 3 buttons. I aligned them, set them to the bottom right here. As you can see, they're all glued together, and it doesn't look too good, so I'm going to separate them a bit. And if you look at the letters, they're too close to the border, so I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. And then I'm going to create set functions to each one of these. So set function associated with the OK button, the L button, the health button. Add events to these, and set one to the default cancel. And now I come to the definition of my data. I'm going to have 6 boxes in there: title, name, surname, age, end date, mail, combo box, text boxes, and so on and so on. And what I do is that if I add them all like this, one after the other, you see, it doesn't look nice. So even when I add this, the problem with this, even if I set the, you see when I see now my checkbox right here has been separated from the mail, from the label. You don't want that. So I was looking at, you see, end date is separate, age is separated. This is not right. So what I really have to do is take them 2 by 2 and put them into a stack panel. So a better way, let's remove them all. I'm going to make a pair, and the way this pair works is just it puts them into a stack panel and puts the orientation to whatever I want, put the label and the other object one after the other. So it's going to put them all together now.
I mean, if you don't like this stuff, you can make a canvas and just put everything in fixed
But
position.
you
No,
lose
no,
all
you
the
don't
ben-
want
you
to
lose all
do
the
that.
benefits. No. And you wouldn't be able to do this with a canvas without a lot of extra work.
You'll get sworn at by everybody.
Yeah.
You can do it.
You can do everything.
About tabs. So we use tabs a lot.
I mean,
Okay, so a form that has a tab object in it.
that exists in WPF. Every single control, I think, except for the APL grid, is available in WPF. There are other ones as well. I have got a prototype already for working with something similar to the APL grid. So everything you've got in Core WC, say just about is there, plus every other control. Effectively, this is the sort of thing that Windows, Word, and those products are using. So every control you have there, you have available now with this. And also you can use third-party controls. There are a lot of very sophisticated third-party controls, WPF controls, and those are all usable with an APL. So you've got the native stuff that comes with .NET, And there are at least 3-4 companies that produce a whole suite of controls that are very sophisticated, which you can use as well. Obviously, you have to pay for those.
Yeah, I don't want to use any external.
Yeah. No, but I mean, you have the full range. You have the full range.
Yeah.
Here's the same example, but this time I've glued together the labels with the object. So right now the title is glued to the combo box, the name and so on. So now when I resize what I have, you can see that, see, they move together because it's a stack panel, and the item stack panel can't be separated. It goes everything to the next line, or it stays on the same line, but there's no. So this is simple.
Right. And that arrangement of nesting can be more complex than just a simple stack panel, which would be what you were talking about, your graphics, and you'd arrange your arrangement of panels to suit what you wanted.
And this one also has an OK button that displays the content. So if I have, for example, I select a date, you see when I click the OK button, you can see down here. And it's displaying the contents of all the, change the title, Mr. displays, and so on and so on. So these buttons are callbacks to APL functions that actually makes it. So there was the example. Here's another one. This time I have, let's say, some data here. And this is all in XML form. So if I look at it, this is what it looks like. So this is very simple data here. Then I create a new document, load, and bind the data with the what I have, my XML form there. So if whenever I change anything here, and I exit, you will see that the data now has changed. If I look at it, whatever I created, whatever I changed, you can see now the name has been changed. So the XML object has been modified. So I could use that, for example, to bind data with a form or something. Modify the form in Baronet is changed. What else? No, that one was not good. This one you've seen.